think if you're getting yours, then you're going to say, okay, well, I'm getting mine, so you can get yours. And in fishery management, what happened with all that is we ruined for the world, not just America. We ruined fisheries for the whole world. So what I need to straighten us out, and I had us straightened out, a long time ago, decades ago. I had my system on the table, vetted through what was called Fishfolk, a listserv that MIT sponsored. And now I guess MIT is run by the rich folks, and they're shutting it down, and they have shut down the archive of Fishfolk, which we handled this. When I say we, people like me and Fred Jennings, he wrote a critique of this book, which is a bunch of gobbledygook. And then New Zealand got right on this with the quota programs. And it's about making a few fishermen rich. And I think where that fits into the grand scheme is that the rich folks, with their maligned interest in the waterfront, and it is really neurotic, it's just as neurotic as the fishermen's, that is the money fishermen, their maligned interest in taking over the fisheries rights. And they got deeded rights, so they have taken it over. And basically you're rich people around all the waterfronts, and it's probably pretty bad here on the Cape and in Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard. The rich people just have a way of acting like kind of a pack of dogs, and then they get with the other pack of dogs, which is these rights-seeking, they want to get rich type fishermen. And I'll tell you a little story. When I was a kid in Saquatucket Harbor, and this was all being discussed, and there were some heated discussions among fishermen, and some fishermen like me, and these are old fishermen, they said it just isn't right. It just isn't right for some people to take all the fishing rights. And so what happened is what you would think would happen is rich people got a hold of all the fishing rights, and the mafia and everyone else, they consolidated as much fishing rights as they could, and now you got a place like P-Town, they're out of business. And that, if it had gone the right way, P-Town would be a thriving port. And when I say the right way, I mean with the sea farm system. Back then, we could have looked into this and done this, but, they were all lined up. All the people, political people, newspapers were lined up with this because that's the rich, basically. And the rich have a job, and that's to line everybody up so they can make money. And I think I explained it this way. There's something I call an economic funnel, and I got this from Charlie Stojak on Nantucket. And the trick is to get people putting money into the funnel, and you get to the bottom of the funnel and get the money as it's coming out. So that's kind of the game plan. When I say the rich, it's people in both parties that are gaming the system as such. And so that takes a lot of allies to do that. And to get good at that, you really need to have a lot of allies. Here's an article in yesterday's paper. Today is the, what is today now? Today's August 8th, pretty sure. Anyway, Tuesday. Yeah, okay. Shame about that nice young lady with the drugs, 22-year-old Kennedy girl. Can't pronounce her first name. Cerise Kennedy Hill. I have known a few of those in that clan, and they're fine people. But I think, like with my family too, being Irish maybe, if you're not watching out, especially the Irish, and there are some other races that have this predisposition. You can tell I'm dated. I was raised, here on the Cape. I'm born in 1957. This was how people talked back then. Irish might have a predisposition to the drink. Okay, sorry. But there are, anyway, that's a shame. That's a shame. So I guess they just buried her. What a damn shame. I keep shaking my head. It's the drugs. And that story plays out in all the communities, basically. Rich, poor. And here, this is what I wanted to get to. Towns strain to reach tornado aid threshold. And I think I was the only one I heard talking like this, but I didn't see a tornado. And I know what a squall is because, this was a typical, extremely powerful squall. It wasn't typical. It was a very, very powerful squall. It was not a tornado. Now, I'm not saying they didn't see updrafts and downdrafts and every other red flag in the radar. Maybe it is a radar tornado that we have here. But I don't know if I'd be afraid of a radar tornado. I think I'd be afraid of a tornado, and I've seen water spouts. And I've never seen a tornado, and I didn't see a tornado. No one said they saw a tornado. When a tornado touches down and then travels, it has a path of destruction. That's what I know. That's what they know in Missouri. Show me the path of destruction. Okay. Now, I guess we're begging for money here, and I don't think we should get it because we had a good blow. But, disaster aid and flooding and everything else, I've always been, my whole life I think I've been against the government spending money on floods because that's just from Mother Nature, and if you build in a low spot, I was told you shouldn't get money for that. You shouldn't get encouraged to do that. And I still feel that way. And I mean, I think I was younger than a teenager when I started developing these opinions, which made sense then, and they still do now. I would say in my public policy, no to flood insurance sponsored by the government. If you build in a low spot, you're taking your chances. Now, if the bank wants to do flood insurance, okay, that's the bank. Cape Town's hit by the three tornadoes now. Oh my God, it's not one tornado, it's three that touched down last month. Well, show me where they touched down, because this destruction was as a squall broke some branches and put some trees down. And it was a good squall, and a lot of the trees that went down, some of the pine trees snapped high up. A lot of the silverleaf trees, which is kind of a softwood, they snapped up pretty good. And as usual, the honey locust trees were down all over the place. And I was told, I didn't know this, but the sandwich glass factory brought these locust trees in because they burned hot for a glass factory. I guess that's pretty important. But I would say, get out there, and I'm glad Governor Baker called in the National Guard and all this, but this is all hype, this nonsense about a tornado. Now, tornadoes don't generally come to this region, but they do occasionally, as we did see tornadoes, or one tornado, I think it was in Western Mass, not too long ago. So I'm not saying we don't get tornadoes here. No, we get tornadoes if we get a tornado. If we don't, then we don't. Getting a tornado for the purposes of getting some money out of the federal government is reprehensible. That's what's going on here. Harwich was one of the hardest hit, and I cleared a couple of branches out of Route 28. I was working on a branch. I had the cop come by and say, get out of the road, I mean, anything's dangerous, but there's one thing that is really dangerous, and that is having your main roads blocked by a tree. So as a instinct, as a fireman on Nantucket, I used to be out in these storms. Me and Don LaHaye, the environmental policeman, we'd get paired up. And that was odd because he was on the side of the state with this pond thing, but we both didn't mind that. That was kind of politics. You know, you set aside your politics and you go help out if you're, let's say, a low-level fireman, volunteer fireman. Then that's a good thing. You get used when you have a blow. So when we had, I think, a hurricane and then Hurricane Bob and a couple others maybe, it was me and Don LaHaye out there, and I wore a full-faced motorcycle helmet because, your branches, I'm aware of that. But I cleared 2 out of 3 blockages on Route 28. Now, if I were a younger man, I would have pulled that branch out of the way, but it was too much for me at age 62. And I had gone back to the car and I'd gotten a piece of rope to tie on. And so I heard a police car coming. And so, boy, I got the traffic. I didn't know it was an ambulance, a police car, or an escort, or what. You don't know, but you got to get that road open. That's a fireman's instinct. So I did that as best I could, 2 out of 3. And then I got scared off by the police, who, for public safety reasons, don't want anyone getting hurt. Well, I got news for you. We really don't have in numbers the fire department like we used to in the old days. And this is gonna come back to bite the police, because you can't have the police dealing with all these major disasters in this country. I think this is true in this country. One of the projects I had designed up was oddly enough, what I call a fire department militia. Okay? It sounds like, if you're going to have a militia, you do that with your police, but I didn't think so. So I designed it that way with the fire department, because your fire department actually needs, in the case of Nantucket, let's say, you need to be able to ring around with hands held. You need to be able to run a ring around a building. You've got to have at least 150, 200 men, because Nantucket never had the mutual aid. For all practical purposes, you can't have that if you're an island out 30 miles out at sea. So that was why I was a fireman, because the community needed that, and I was a young, strong man, so I did my best to pitch in. But I was not a professional. I was just a low-level fireman. But I guess the instincts kick in when you have branches all down on Route 28. The first priority is to get that artery opened up, So that's what I was doing. I didn't see the police out there with chainsaws. Maybe they were. But that's the job of your fire departments and everyone else, your Marine Department, DPW, you go down the chain of command and you get everybody involved. So that would be the nature of a fire department militia, which the police, the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Army, Coast Guard, Air Force can probably sift through a few of those guys and pick out a few cherries. That was basically it with that idea. And then you've got coverage for God knows what, like an act of nature, a squall, not a tornado. Okay, this is kind of absurd to me, this whole thing, this tornado thing. Harwich was one of the hardest hit towns. Okay. Cost the municipality $3.2 million. 3,000 trees. Oh, I think the number's higher. 3,000 trees that matter, close to the roads maybe. That's how Mother Nature thins out and cleans up. Qualify for disaster aid. Cape had to incur about $9.6 million in storm-related costs. So, what if you don't make it to that? I just don't believe in it, I guess, as I've said, with the flooding, flood insurance and all that. I just don't believe in it. Now, that would make me a little to the right of center, I think. But when you sign up for things like this, you encourage waste, fraud, and abuse. You encourage people building in low areas. I'd say the government that governs best is the government that governs least. That I don't believe in that per se, but it applies to this. So, storm roared through Yarmouth. Okay, it's a storm. I like that. Yarmouth estimates $1 million. So I think the line was, I don't know where the line was for this squall, but it definitely came through in a line from somewhere in Yarmouth. Probably past Chatham, I'm not sure. Could have ended in Chatham for all I know, but the footage that I saw of Stage Harbor, that looked to me like it could be 90, and I was hearing 90 miles an hour sustained winds that did this damage, and I was thinking, I believe that. I do. Sustained 90 mile an hour squall. Sustained, not all day, but when the squall was moving through, yes. So I read this book years ago, I mentioned it before, called 2 Years Before the Mast by Richard Henry Dana. And he was saying that when a ship came around the Horn from California and it was crossing the Gulf Stream to our south here, that they would incur squalls that were powerful and that could knock a ship down and send it to the bottom. And that's that tropical air, and I'm not saying I am a meteorologist by any stretch, but I know what I know, and that is a squall zone, just like we have a tornado alley, and we're not Cape Cod and Western Mass. It could happen once in a while, and it does, but we're not in that normal alley, so we're just not. Single biggest expense is the grinder and the landfill, yeah. But boy, you got to hand it to all these linemen that came in from every corner of the globe, to our small area, and they got our power on. I think it was somewhere around 30 hours. So we tried not to open our refrigerator, and now that it's over, I put a few gallons of water in the freezer so that it could have some chill mass to keep the refrigerator cold. And we really didn't incur too much food damage at all. Dennis is calculating the damage. So this is all, we're all lining up here for the money. I don't think it's pathetic. I just think it's a normal thing government workers do, but I don't like it. Okay. No public buildings were damaged in the tornadoes, and without that type of damage, it may be difficult for the Cape to qualify for assistance for a non-tornado. In a way, I think this is humorous, this tornado thing. It's like, as I said on Facebook to someone or other, it's like the emperor. The emperor have clothes on? And the little boy says, the emperor's not wearing any clothes. I feel like the little boy half the time. If you don't see a tornado and no one saw a tornado, and the only one that saw a tornado was looking in a radar screen, then you might want to question whether or not we actually got a tornado or whether we got a radar tornado and the hype. And I'm not saying I know a tornado didn't touch down at some point somewhere, but it probably, if it did, it didn't get its feet on the ground, as a tornado does when it starts to form up and form that funnel, and then it travels, as we all know. As we all know, we didn't get that. right? But we want to say it's a tornado. It's like a lot of other issues, I think. Really? You want to say it's a tornado? You know? Like this fishery management thing. Oh, you want to say it's conservation? Do you want to say that? Well, it isn't. But in sharing the fish, you could say that it's conservation. You could say that. The rich people lined you up and you get to be a blithering idiot for the rich who are neurotic about their waterfront, as neurotic as the fishermen are about keeping other fishermen out of the fishing industry. That's neurotic. I mean, I can see conservation. But this stuff here, this is all about limited entry and, the IQF, individual fishing quotas. Now, I have something called the market quota system, which is truly a market system for us all. It's for the public, it's for the fishermen, it's a market system that's based on poundage, not a real estate deed to fish. So my system is definitely a conservation system at its core. And with my market quota system, unlike anything in this book, you penalize what you don't want, which is destruction of the habitat. So 90% of the market quota system, or the sea farm system, is punishment, if you will, for the bad, penalizing the bad, and then incentivizing the good. Say you need jig fishermen for the codfish. Well, we don't have codfish, but that's another story. You want to incentivize these fishermen and fishing communities to have artificial reef works, and even, Toledo, Ohio, or Cincinnati can do a lot of these jobs. If there's any inner city people listening that want work, just make me the most popular guy in the country, and I'll get you the work. Because this is the work. This stuff that I design, that's the work for the poor. And it's fishery-based, but it's real. It's real work that puts food on the table for the country. Because if we have a solid fisheries with these mussel reefs, they can be used for shark fences, by the way. If we use these job-creating reef systems that I have been coming up with for years, my God, since I was a teenager. Now that can have an impact on every blighted inner city that Trump looks at and he's disgusted. Well, Trump can, look over here and say, well, there's a guy, happens to be a right-winger, I could be a left-winger, happens to have some good ideas because the rich people and the fishermen gave me a good smackdown. Now, when I was getting smacked down on Nantucket, the fishermen hated me because I was not for this, sharing the fish. And this is kind of crazy because sharing the fish means a few people only get to have the permits to be the fishermen. So there's no sharing involved. It's a few greedy people with the rich people that got their way. And that has to be fixed. There's so much that has to be fixed. It's garbage, this stuff that we get involved in half the time. It really is. So this is Fred Jennings of Harvard economist. Now, him and I did a lot of work on fish folk, but the archives, that are MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology archives, have been absconded with, I think by the rich. The rich people did this because they've been up to no good for a long time, and this is just one of their little offenses against the United States of America, that they should get into the MIT business and capture all this good work that I did and that Fred Jennings did with working on the market quota system, and as Fred called the system, VP, value price market quota system. And I said, how about we call it market quota system value price? He said, fine. But it's his system just as much as mine because he has the credentials to label it property. And for him to come in and side with my system was awesome for me because I had all these people, all these PhDs who I was smacking down pretty good in a debate. And their answer would be that the fishermen won't like it. Fishermen aren't going to like that. So I'm putting a system on the table that works for the world and for America and for the state and for the local fishing economies and for the ocean and for the habitats and for all the codfish, etc. I'm putting that on the table. And I'm from a town meeting heritage, so I'm not some communist that came out of left field here. These are all, what I put on the table is pretty much, I think, right out of the proper playbook for the USA. I mean, it's proper to have a fisheries management system, and it's not proper to give the assets away. Just give them away. The rich people get into that. Man, were they wrong. And on Nantucket, they really hurt us badly with our little floating marine, not floating, but our little marine laboratory. It was the rich people that got in there and ruined that with the monkey wrenches. Quietly. So this is Scaring the Fish, a critique of the NRC's justification for individual transferable quotas and a systems analysis of their likely effects. So that's what I do, systems analysis work. And this is prepared at the request of Niaz Dory, Greenpeace, U.S. Oceans Campaign. But I gotta be ashamed of Greenpeace because they dropped the ball and they couldn't be talked to. So maybe the rich people were giving some money to Greenpeace and the rich people said to Greenpeace, hey, you want our money? Do you really need this money? Come on. You don't need the money, do you? They said, yeah, we do. Well, this is the way to go if you do need the money. I think Greenpeace sold out big time. And Greenpeace opposed this guy, Fred Jennings. Frederick B. Jennings, Jr., Ph.D. I visited him in his home in Ipswich, Mass. So it's one thing to have a fisherman come up with this system, but this guy here, you know, he's a Harvard economist. And he's getting into it with me. It's like he called it good cop, bad cop. And he was right. Because from a political standpoint, you know, he was not as rough and tumble on the debate floor as I was on Fish Folk. And these were debates. And the rich people have that sewed up now. They don't want that getting out. They don't want me, the rich people on Nantucket, do not want me to gain any credibility because the rich people on Nantucket were behind the DNA switch to get me put away. They were sick of dealing with me, with the pond thing. I think there comes a point in time when the rich take over the world and there's nothing we can do about it. They own all the militaries of the world. So I'm worried about the rich people, big time, taking over and getting into the partnerships they have. So I guess that'll wrap it up for today. Thanks very much for watching the Scannell Agenda.